You know, when you see a headline about a bus and truck collision on a Monday morning, it's easy to think of it as just another tragic news story. But this incident in Telangana, it was so much more than that. It was the final devastating result of a long chain of failures in policy, in our infrastructure, and in enforcement. So today, we're going to unravel how a system that's supposed to protect people could break down so completely.
And really, it all boils down to this one pretty shocking question. How on earth does a single pothole end up causing the deaths of 19 people? Now, yeah, the immediate cause was a lorry swerving to miss that pothole. But the real story, the one we need to understand, is hidden in all the layers of risk that were allowed to just pile up, turning what should have been a minor event into an absolute catastrophe. To really get the full picture of this breakdown, we've got to start with the incident itself. So let's take a closer look at exactly what happened on that fatal morning on National Highway 163. Okay, so picture this. It's about 7:15 a.m. A state-run bus, packed with people on their way to Hyderabad, is suddenly hit head-on by a huge 10-wheeler lorry. The investigation showed that the lorry driver swerved right into the oncoming lane to dodge a pothole on this narrow two-lane road. It was a split-second decision made just 20 meters before impact.
But here's what made this incident so incredibly lethal. It's something forensics experts call the second collision. The first impact was obviously horrific, but it was the truck's cargo, tons and tons of loose gravel, that poured into the bus cabin like a tidal wave. This secondary event is what caused so many of the deaths, through crushing and asphyxiation. It just amplified the tragedy beyond comprehension. The final death toll was confirmed at 19, and that included both drivers. The victims were mostly women, 13 in total, along with 5 men and even an infant. This kind of loss isn't just bad luck. It was the direct result of a deadly equation, one with 3 catastrophic variables that were all in play at the exact same time. As investigators started digging in, it became crystal clear that this was way more than a simple driver's error. It was the convergence of 3 separate, massive failures, a deadly triad that created the absolute perfect storm for disaster.
So first element of this deadly triad, the lorry itself. Get this, it was hauling between 60 and 70 tons of gravel. That is nearly double its legal capacity. An overload that extreme makes a vehicle incredibly hard to control and just multiplies the force of an impact.
The second element was the bus. It had seats for 51 people, but that morning it was carrying an estimated 72 passengers. This severe overcrowding meant more people were exposed to the crash and that deadly gravel spill, which tragically drove the number of casualties way up. And the third and final piece of this terrible puzzle, the road itself. Locals apparently called the 45-kilometer stretch a snake-like road, and for good reason. It had nearly 300 potholes and 60 sharp turns. It was a known death trap that provided the final, fatal trigger for this whole event.
When you lay it all out like this, it's just staggering. We're not talking about small mistakes here. We're talking about a truck that's almost double its legal weight, a bus crammed with 40% more people than it should have, all happening on a road riddled with hundreds of defects. Every single number on this chart represents a broken rule, a failed inspection, a risk that was just ignored. Any one of them is dangerous. But when you combine them, a tragedy like this wasn't just possible, it was practically inevitable. And here's the most important part. These weren't just random, unfortunate events. They were all symptoms of much deeper, systemic problems in how things were being governed and regulated. So let's dig into how these issues created a system that was really built to fail. So, why was a truck carrying double its legal load on the road to begin with? Well, the answer, ironically, is tied to a policy that was actually meant to do good. To fight corruption, the state had recently gotten rid of 15 transport checkposts. The problem was, they didn't replace them with any automated systems. This created a huge enforcement gap, a regulatory vacuum that allowed overloaded trucks to drive around with very little fear of ever being caught. And what about the overcrowded bus? Well, here we find this tragic paradox. The state's Mahalakshmi scheme, which offered free bus travel for women, was a massive social success. It was amazing. Ridership shot up to nearly 100%. But, and this is a huge but, the state never increased the number of buses to meet this new demand. So a policy that was designed to empower women tragically ended up putting more of them at risk on dangerously overcrowded buses. And the road itself? Believe it or not, a project to widen this deadly stretch from 2 lanes to 4 was approved all the way back in 2021. But it got stuck for years because of legal challenges trying to protect historic banyan trees. And while that debate was happening, for years, commuters were forced to use a road that everybody knew was a death trap. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the focus, rightly, shifted from just blame to accountability. And this led to a really powerful legal argument that framed the whole incident not just as an accident, but as a violation of fundamental human rights. The government's immediate response was to announce a payment of 7 lakh rupees, which is about $8,400 to the families of each victim. And while that's a necessary gesture of relief, it did very little to answer the deeper questions about justice and who was truly responsible. This is where Article 21 of the Indian Constitution becomes so important. It guarantees the right to life, and over the years, India's Supreme Court has interpreted this right to include the right to have safe roads, making the government directly responsible for keeping them in good condition. Citing that exact provision, the Telangana Human Rights Commission took action on its own. And their statement was incredibly powerful. They declared the crash was a result of gross negligence by the state and a direct violation of the victim's constitutional right to life. This completely reframed the incident. It wasn't a traffic accident anymore. It was a fundamental failure of the state to protect its citizens. And when you look at the data, it's clear this was not a freak event. Road fatalities in Telangana have been steadily, troublingly, climbing for years. The Chevella tragedy was the horrific peak of a trend that had been building in plain sight, fueled by the exact systemic failures we've been talking about. So how do you even begin to fix a system that's this broken? Well, experts have laid out a pretty clear path forward. It's one that shifts the focus from just reacting with compensation to proactively preventing this from ever happening again. The blueprint for a safer future is actually clear and it's actionable. First, you have to embrace technology. Use automated weigh-in motion systems to enforce truckloads without the risk of corruption. Second, create a way to fund rapid repairs for known death traps like NH163. Third, and this is crucial, you have to buy more buses to make sure that public transport is both successful and safe. And finally, you need a truly empowered and independent road safety authority to actually coordinate all this and make sure it gets done. The story of the Chevella tragedy is just a heartbreaking reminder of how all these seemingly separate failures, a flawed policy here, a delayed project there, can all connect and lead to something catastrophic. It really compels us to ask, what small cracks are forming in the systems we all rely on every single day, and what can we do to fix them before they, too, lead to disaster?